My players had arrived in the city of Deskar, a tiny farming village nestled on the banks of a river. Unfortunately, the sleepy town had been plagued with disappearances and murders over the last few weeks. It was up to the party to figure out who, or what, was behind the attacks. But how I thought this quest would go, and what actually happened at the table, ended up being quite different. And I think this story illustrates one of the fundamental lessons of DMing that I've learned over the years. In D&D, nothing is real until you say it is. What exactly do I mean? Let's find out. After accepting the task of solving the disappearances, and learning about the reward of course, my players quickly began questioning villagers, investigating the murder scenes, and gathering evidence. Of course, I knew who was behind it all, a sea hag who was kidnapping women from the village and turning them into monsters to form her own coven. In my head, this is how it would all play out. My party would discover clues indicating that the killer was a sea hag and would learn that it's been stalking the river outside the city. Then they'd dive in, find the creature's underwater lair, and fight her along with the new coven. Pretty simple. And at first, it looked like this is how things would go. My players were using their different skills to gather the clues I had prepared. Things like scratch marks, scales, and a scared neighbor who had actually seen the creature. They learned about its connection to the river and seemed intent on checking it out. They were getting to drive the action by choosing how to investigate, and I was getting to subtly direct them to the hag fight I was looking forward to. Win-win. Unfortunately for me, it turned out the players and I weren't exactly on the same page. In my head, I wanted the party to figure out what was causing the disappearances. And they had. They knew it was a sea hag. But in my players' heads, this was a murder mystery, and there was a whole village of potential suspects. They weren't as concerned with what was doing this, but who. Sure, there was a hag here, but which innocent-looking resident was it? Instead of looking for the hag's lair, they were looking for the hag. And since they knew it was connected to the river, they decided to hold a stakeout and try to catch the culprit as it returned to the waterway. That's a great plan, if the hag was actually a villager. But in my notes, it wasn't. That hag was currently hiding out in its lair, turning some poor person into a monster, and didn't have any reason to leave. If I followed my notes as written, this stakeout was going to be a flop. And ultimately, that's a boring session. Thankfully for me and my players, I've learned a lesson that I think every dungeon master should keep in mind as they're running the game. In D&D, nothing is real until you say it is. Until you speak it into existence at your table, your notes and preconceived ideas are just words on a page, guidelines like the pirate code. And sometimes abandoning what you have written to better serve what's happening at the table is the right way to go. That's not to say you should always change your plans on a whim. If I had set up this quest as a proper murder mystery with clues that led to a specific individual, I wouldn't just change the culprit because my player's first guess was wrong. Sometimes failure is fun and can lead to deeper stories and better sessions. But when what you wrote before the game is bringing things to a grinding halt to the detriment of everyone's fun, remembering that you have the power to change your notes on the fly is important. Back to my murder mystery, I knew that sticking to my notes was going to lead to a failed stakeout and bummer of a session ending, so I changed things up. They had been suspicious of the cleric who ran the city's temple, a woman that seemed a little more nonchalant about the disappearances than other villagers they'd encountered. She was also closely connected to one of the missing people, making her an ideal hag to be. I described how my players saw the cleric coming out of the town gates, and their reactions as she made her way to the river were all I needed to know I made the right call. Chaos broke out. Some of my players pursued her. 2, the party cleric and wizard, had buried themselves in the sand to be better disguised, only to now realize they were stuck trying to break free. The hag dove into the river, and the druid turned into a shark to give chase, only to end up alone and faced with both angry sea hags. He barely escaped, and the session ended with him returning to the party, now aware of just what they were facing. It was an awesome climax to a fun session, and none of it would have been possible if I hadn't remembered that until it happens at the table, notes are just notes. This rule applies to almost every facet of the game. If your party wants to find a map maker in town, but you hadn't planned on one being there, why not make one up? There won't always be a cartographer around, but if it helps move things forward, there definitely can be. Or if your party is investigating the king's missing crown and take a liking to an NPC you hadn't really wrote as playing a big role, well, maybe they know a little more than you had planned and can be involved in the plot so your players can keep having fun with them. Stories in D&D are always evolving as you and your players work together to tell a version of a tale that you've all had a hand in making, not just your notes. One last way this idea applies in D&D is in your descriptions. Your players have exactly as much information about any place, people, or event in your world as you give them. Quite literally, nothing is real to them until you say it's there. So when describing a room you want your players to search, or a person they have to get information from, make sure you're giving the party enough information to go on that they can actually succeed. Nothing is more frustrating than having your players spend 20 minutes turning a room inside out to find the trap door under the rug, because you didn't tell them that there was a rug. Whether it's reevaluating your notes on the fly, coming up with descriptions for a major study, or just leaning into the threads your players grab onto, in D&D, nothing is real until you say it is. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope it empowers you to not throw out your notes, but remember that you have the power to change the truth of your story. With the players' help, of course. Do you have any memorable times where you changed things up in the moment for the better? Or maybe times where you accidentally didn't give the party enough to work with? I'd love to hear about them in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like is always appreciated, and you can consider subscribing to the Bard's College. I make videos about D&D, DMing, and everything in between, so if you like this one, stick around. But for now, good luck, and remember, crit your players.